Welcome back to the Resolution Room. In our last episode, we shone a light on how trauma might be quietly influencing your workplace, affecting performance, communication, and conflicts in ways you might not have realized. Maybe you've listened and thought, yikes, that sounds familiar. Now what do I do about it? Fear not. This episode is all about solutions. We're going to discuss what leaders, HR professionals, and even team members can do to support a trauma-informed workplace. The goal is not to turn you into therapists, but to help you lead and collaborate in ways that acknowledge people's humanity and hidden struggles while still getting the job done. In fact, when done right, this approach helps get the job done because when people feel safe and supported, they perform better, communicate clearer, and handle conflicts more constructively. First, let's clarify what we mean by a trauma-informed workplace. According to the CDC and other experts, it comes down to an organization operating with an understanding of trauma's impact and committing to practices that mitigate those effects. Key principles often cited include things like psychological safety, trust and transparency, peer support, collaboration, empowerment with voice and choice, and cultural sensitivity. That's a bit of a mouthful, but here's a simpler way to think about it. And this is brought from a Harvard Business Review summary. The first step, acknowledgement. People feel heard and seen, not ignored or brushed aside when they express distress. Step 2, support. People can get help or accommodations when they're struggling, rather than being penalized for it. And step 3, trust. People know they will be treated fairly and not harmed for being open. This builds a sense of security. In practice, being trauma-informed at work means baking empathy and awareness into the culture and policies. It's not about singling people out or knowing everyone's life story. In fact, one of the first things experts stress is don't pry. As HR professional Jessica Donahue says, it's not about digging into people's individuals' history so much as about creating a workplace that honors different trauma histories and doesn't perpetuate further harm. In other words, you don't need to know who went through what. You just design your workplace assuming many people are dealing with something. It's a bit like universal precautions in medicine. Doctors wear gloves, not because they know a particular patient has an infection, but because it's safer practice overall. Trauma-informed leadership is kind of like universal precaution. Assume at least some employees are trauma survivors and interact with everyone with that awareness and care. Now, let's get concrete. What can leaders and organizations do to be supportive and trauma-informed? I'm going to walk through several strategies and tools. As we do, I'll share insights and even a few quotes from experts in psychology and organizational behavior who specialize in the area. First, foster psychological safety. If you remember nothing else from this episode, remember this point. Psychological safety at work is the foundation for supporting people who have trauma. And honestly, it benefits everyone. Psychological safety means people feel safe to speak up, make mistakes, and be themselves without fear of punishment or ridicule. It's that feeling of, I can express concern or admit an error here and I won't be attacked for it. This concept has gained a lot of attention in recent years because it's been linked to high-performing teams. In fact, a global study of 28,000 professionals found that employees who feel psychologically safe are 2 to 3 times more motivated, engaged, and likely to reach their potential at work. It's also huge for retention, especially among underrepresented groups. For trauma survivors, psychological safety is basically the antidote to their fears. If your workplace explicitly and consistently sends the message, we've got your back, it's safe to share and safe to fail, you counteract that internal narrative trauma instilled in them that says, don't trust anyone, or if I mess up, I'm in danger. So, how do leaders foster this safety? Start with behaviors. Encourage open communication and respect. Leaders should model active listening and non-judgmental responses. Something as simple as saying after someone shares a concern, "Thank you for telling me that. I appreciate your honesty," can reinforce that it was good, not bad, to speak up. Remember, our expert, Catherine Manning, she emphasizes listening and acknowledging pain. A critical element of trauma-informed leadership is being willing to listen and acknowledge the pain of those experiencing trauma, Manning writes. Sometimes just validating with a phrase like, "I'm sorry you're going through that," can make a big difference. For a trauma survivor, feeling heard is incredibly healing. No public shaming, no yelling, ever. This should be obvious, but high stress workplaces sometimes default to harsh confrontation. If someone makes a mistake, discuss it in private with calm professionalism. Public reprimands or a boss losing their temper not only scares the person in the crosshairs, but they create a climate of fear for everyone watching. A trauma informed manager keeps their cool and addresses issues without personal attacks. Encourage questions and admit your own mistakes. Leaders who occasionally say, I was wrong or I need your help demonstrate humility and approachability. It shows employees that it's okay to not be perfect. This especially helps those who have trauma around failure or authority. It humanizes the authority figure as someone who won't pounce on them for an error. Establish norms of civility and inclusion. Make it clear that bullying, harassment, or discrimination will not be tolerated. Recall that trauma can result from things like bias or harassment at work too. Protecting employees from these harms is part of being trauma informed. And if issues arise, they sometimes will, leaders must act promptly to address them so employees trust that the workplace is and will remain safe. One more tip. Consider team discussions or training on psychological safety and empathy. Simply having a conversation at work about these values can set the tone. Some companies even bring in trainers or facilitators to do workshops on respectful communication or understanding unconscious biases and triggers. By educating everyone, not just managers, you create shared understanding. As an example, some HR departments now offer training on recognizing trauma signs and de escalating conflicts. These aren't touchy feely seminars, they give practical communication tools. And remember, Gen Z and millennials are leading a lot of this push. Younger workers expect more open dialogue about mental health and trauma. So listening to their input can guide where training or policy needs to evolve. Provide training and awareness for leaders. Well, trauma-informed leadership. HR professionals and managers are the first line of support, or unfortunately, sometimes the first line of harm. So investing in training for leaders to be trauma-informed is crucial. This might include learning about the basics of trauma, like we did in episode 1, how to recognize signs that an employee might be in distress, and how to respond appropriately. For instance, a manager should learn that if an employee is consistently snapping at colleagues or withdrawing, it might be a signal to check in privately rather than just label them difficult. A simple approach could be, hey, I noticed you seemed upset in the meeting. Is everything all right? If there's anything affecting your work that I can help with, let me know. We have resources if you need support. This kind of conversation opens the door without prying. It signals care and gives the employee a chance to share or ask for help if they choose. Organizations like the Wounded Workplace Program, which was founded by Stephanie Lemech, who we previously mentioned, they're popping up to certify managers in trauma-informed practices. Lemech's training, for example, covers 7 core principles: safety, trust, community, collaboration, empowerment, humility, and cultural awareness, and then teaches what those look like in everyday work. One thing she tells HR folks is to focus on empowerment and choice. Quote, when HR professionals ask me what's one thing they can do to be more trauma-informed, I suggest start thinking how you can provide your teams with choice. Give them options in how they complete their work. This is straight from Lemech's guidance. Why choice? Because trauma often involves a loss of control. By handing some control back to employees, even in small ways like flexible scheduling or choice of projects, you help them feel safe and respected. Stephanie Lemech also makes a great point that trauma-informed workplaces benefit everyone, not just those who obviously need it. She said, regardless of whether or not you've experienced trauma, and regardless of whether or not you recognize how that trauma may be showing up for you at work, the way we build our cultures, processes, and systems should support those individuals and help them and the organization be successful. In short, design your workplace for the hardest moments people face, not just the best case scenario. If you do, everyone thrives more. It raises the floor for the whole organization. So, consider formal training sessions or at least educational materials for your leaders. Many HR conferences now include sessions on trauma-enforced leadership. There are also books and online courses on this topic. It might cover things like how to have difficult conversations without re traumatizing someone, or how to recognize when an employee might be triggered. For example, noticing body language like a glazed look or shaking when under pressure, which might mean it's time to pause and regroup. Revise policies and practices with a trauma informed lens. This is about looking at your HR policies, benefits, and everyday practices and asking, does this consider the potential needs of someone who's been through trauma? Sometimes small tweaks can make a big difference. Let's break down a few areas. PTO and other flexibility. Do your leave policies allow someone to take mental health days without stigma? If an employee has a PTSD flare up or needs a day to attend therapy, is that treated respectfully? Progressive companies are starting to offer not just sick days, but specific wellness days or mental health leave. Also, flexible hours or remote work options can help someone who has anxiety or who might need to attend support appointments. During particularly triggering events, say an employee experiences a personal loss or there's a disturbing world event, can they work from home or adjust their schedule? Being flexible shows trust and compassion and often yields loyalty in return. Employee assistance programs and counseling. Ensure that your company's health benefits cover mental health services, including trauma therapy if possible. Promote these resources proactively. It's one thing to have an EAP, it's another for people to actively feel okay using it. Leadership should periodically remind staff, hey, our EAP is available and free for you, confidentially, if you ever want to talk to someone. Some companies bring in counselors for the briefing after a traumatic workplace incident, like an accident at work or the sudden death of a colleague. Even if your workplace isn't inherently high risk, think of implementing policies like if there is a critical incident, automatically giving affected employees company sponsored counseling sessions or some days off to recover. This should be as normal as providing first aid after a physical injury. Performance reviews and feedback process. Traditional performance reviews can be very anxiety provoking, even more so for trauma survivors. Consider training managers to deliver feedback in a constructive and supportive manner. Emphasize no surprises. Issues should be addressed in real time coaching, not saved up to drop like a bomb. Some organizations are moving towards more frequent, lighter feedback conversations rather than one annual high stakes review. This can reduce the fear factor and build a continuous dialogue. Also, encourage a two-way feedback process. Let employees voice concerns about their workload or environment, not specifically about their manager. And if someone is struggling, that might be when they reveal, I have a lot going on personally. That opens the door to offering help, like adjusting deadlines or temporarily reassigning some duties. Conflict resolution and complaint procedures. Make sure there are safe channels for employees to report issues, like harassment or bullying, and that they can do so without retaliation. Trauma informed policy means when someone comes forward with a complaint, even if it seems minor to you, you treat it with seriousness and care. Also, consider offering mediation or conflict coaching for interpersonal issues. Sometimes a neutral third party, like an HR mediator or an external counselor, can help two employees understand each other's perspectives, potentially unveiling those hidden triggers. For example, an employee might say in mediation, when you raise your voice, it really frightens me because of something in my past. That kind of insight is powerful. It humanizes the conflict. Emergency planning. If your work involves potential crises like healthcare, social work, or even intense corporate environments, have a plan for debriefing and supporting employees after traumatic events. For instance, hospitals often have protocols for staff after a patient death or violence in the ER, like a brief counseling session or a peer support group. In corporate settings, this could be after something like layoffs, which can be traumatic for those losing jobs and survivors alike. Maybe you bring in a counselor to talk about coping with the change. The idea is to not assume everyone will just deal with it on their own. Here's a real example. One company, as cited in an article, established a salary floor of $80,000 for all employees as part of creating a sense of financial safety. The rationale was that if people aren't constantly stressed about making ends meet, they feel more secure and can focus better at work. Now, not every business can set a high minimum salary, but it shows creative thinking. They've identified financial insecurity as a trauma trigger and addressed it through policy. At the very least, ensure your pay and benefits are fair and transparent. Uncertainty or a sense of injustice and compensation can be very triggering and just plain stressful for anyone. Cultivate an empathetic, supportive culture. Culture is shaped by daily interactions and what leaders reinforce. To be trauma informed, try to cultivate empathy and peer support across the board. Encourage colleagues to look out for one another. Something as simple as team members casually asking, "Are you doing okay?" when someone seems off or offering help when someone is under pressure can create a sense of community. Consider peer support initiatives. This could be formal, like a peer mentorship program, or informal, like encouraging social bonds through team lunches or interest groups. When people at work have supportive friendships, it buffers stress. An employee who has a trusted coworker to vent to after a scary client call, for example, will recover faster than one who feels alone. One trauma expert, Aliska Fernandez from McLean and Company, noted that common elements of trauma-aware workplaces include providing support from peers and supervisors and prioritizing safety and choice. It's this idea that we're all in it together. We've got each other's backs. Leaders can lead the way by showing empathy in their own behavior. If someone shares that they're struggling, respond with kindness. Avoid the instinct to judge or solve immediately. Sometimes just saying, "I'm sorry to hear that. Thank you for telling me. Let's see what might help," is enough to make that person feel valued rather than ashamed. It can also help to normalize conversations about stress and self care. For example, a manager might say in a team meeting, "It's been a crazy week. I hope you all get some rest this weekend. I know I'm planning to unplug and recharge." Little comments like that signal that it's okay to not be 110% all the time and that well being is important. If leadership occasionally talks about mental health, even in general terms or via company wide wellness emails, it reduces stigma. Organizational psychologist Dr. Bruce Perry, a trauma specialist, often emphasizes that relationships are the agents of change. In a workplace context, this means building a network of healthy relationships, up, down, and across the org chart. This is a key part of healing and growth. A supportive boss or a caring coworker can literally be a stabilizing force for someone dealing with trauma. Also, be mindful of special groups. If you have employees who are veterans, refugees, or from communities that experience higher trauma exposure, consider targeted support or at least awareness around events that might trigger them. For instance, a loud construction noise in the office might startle a veteran with PTSD. Maybe offer them a quieter workplace option. If there's upsetting news like a racial violence incident, acknowledge it and remind about support resources, as those could trigger trauma in some employees. This level of empathy shows you see employees as whole people and acknowledge the world can impact them. Empower and involve employees in decisions. As mentioned earlier, empowerment and choice are huge. One major way to put this into action is by involving employees in decision making, where feasible. This could range from giving employees more autonomy in their day to day methods to soliciting their input on the changes that will affect their work. For example, if a policy change is coming, say a new performance evaluation system, instead of just imposing it, get feedback early on. We're thinking of changing how we do reviews. What would be most helpful for you in that process? By doing this, you help employees feel a sense of control rather than a sense of things just happening to them. Remember, trauma often instills a feeling of powerlessness. Anytime you can replace powerlessness with participation, you've scored a win. On a smaller scale, managers can empower team members by letting them make choices about their work. Maybe allow some choice in project assignments, or let the team have a say in setting deadlines that are responsible and reasonable rather than top-down mandates. Micromanagerial environments where employees will constantly monitor and nitpick can be very triggering for trauma survivors. It echoes controlling relationships. Giving trust and autonomy, by contrast, is calming and confidence building. One more angle: professional development and growth opportunities. Trauma can undermine someone's confidence and sense of future. By actively supporting their growth, mentoring them, nominating them for trainings, etc., You send the message, I believe in you and you have potential. That can be tremendously empowering for someone who internally might doubt their worth. Lead by example, regulate yourself, and set the tone. Leaders, this one's for you personally. Manage your own stress and reactions. A leader who is frequently anxious, angry, or unpredictable can inadvertently trigger everyone around them. In contrast, a leader who is calm under pressure and handles setbacks with grace provides a model of stability. Earlier, we discussed how employees might get triggered by certain behaviors from bosses. So do a self check. Are there times when I might come across as threatening or unsafe in my behavior? Be honest. Even a raised voice or a dismissive comment in a tense moment can have an outsized impact when you're the boss. Working on your own emotional intelligence is part of trauma informed leadership. This might mean learning your own triggers and how to pause instead of react. For instance, if you feel anger rising in a meeting, practice techniques to stay composed. Take a breath, suggest a short break, whatever it takes. By doing so, you avoid creating a secondary trauma for someone else. It's also perfectly fine and good to share a bit of your humanity with your team. If you as a leader are having a tough time, without oversharing, you might say, I have some personal challenges going on, so I really appreciate everyone's support this week. That shows it's okay to be human here. Or, if you made a mistake in how you handle something, perhaps you realize you were too harsh in a meeting, you can actually circle back and apologize. Hey team, I want to apologize for my tone earlier. I'm under some stress, but that's no excuse. I value you all, and I'm sorry I caused any worry. That kind of vulnerability from a leader can be powerful. It builds trust. It tells employees this is a safe space where we own up and care about each other's feelings. Self care for leaders is worth mentioning. Dealing with others' traumas, even indirectly, can be taxing. Making sure you're not pouring from an empty cup is very important. Whether it's peer support with other managers, getting your own coaching or counseling, or simply unplugging after hours, do what you need to do to stay balanced. A burned out leader cannot foster a healthy environment. As Catherine Manning points out, part of leading through trauma is managing your own energy and practicing self care so you can be there for others. Here are a few additional tools you might consider implementing. A trauma informed HR checklist. Some organizations develop a checklist for managers. For example, if an employee seemed distressed, have you done X, Y, Z? Including reminding them of resources or adjusting workload temporarily. This helps standardize compassionate responses. Wellness rooms are quiet spaces. Having a small designated quiet room or a wellness space in the office can be great. It gives anyone a place to go and gather themselves if they're feeling overwhelmed or anxious, kind of like a pressure release valve. Just a 15-minute break in a peaceful room can help someone center themselves and avoid a panic attack or meltdown at their desk. Mindfulness or stress reduction programs. Offering mindfulness training, meditation sessions, or yoga classes on site or even virtually can equip employees with tools to regulate their stress responses. It's not specifically trauma therapy, but these practices are known to help calm the nervous system. If someone's triggered, knowing a breathing exercise they learned at the company wellness workshop could help them ground themselves. Plus, it shows the company cares about mental well being. Storytelling and success sharing. This is a softer tool. Celebrate examples where someone overcame a challenge with support. For instance, if an employee went through a tough personal time, but with accommodations, got back on track and succeeded, share that with their permission, of course, as a story in a newsletter or a town hall. It reinforces the culture. We support each other through hard times and come out stronger. Sometimes, senior leaders even share their own stories of overcoming adversity. When done appropriately, this can reduce stigma and inspire. An executive saying, I lost a family member years ago and it really affected my work, but with support, I got through it, can resonate. It tells employees that it's okay to struggle and that there's hope. Let's revisit our friends from episode 1 with a happier lens. Remember Alex, who was hypervigilant and anxious in a trauma-informed workplace? Her manager might notice Alex's stress and initiate a kind conversation. But Alex confides that she's been having panic attacks. The manager in HR could adjust her deadlines for a bit, Hook her up with the EAP for counseling and perhaps pair her with a mentor who can help her prioritize tasks when she gets overwhelmed. They also make sure to give her positive feedback regularly to rebuild her confidence. Over time, she starts to trust that she won't be punished for having a bad day. She uses some coping strategies she learned in therapy, which she accessed thanks to insurance and HR's encouragement, and her performance improves. She feels safer and actually becomes more engaged in her work than ever. A year later, she's not cured of her trauma. That's a personal journey. But she is thriving at work and even volunteers to lead a new project. Sometimes she never would have thought that she would have had that confidence to do that before. Now, Sal and Greg from the team meeting meltdown, how could that have gone differently with trauma informed practices? For one, Greg would have given Sal feedback one on one, not in front of the team, avoiding triggering Sal's shame in public. He might have started the conversation by acknowledging something Sal did well before addressing the missed deadline to prevent Sal from feeling attacked. If Sal still reacted defensively, Greg, armed with training, might recognize, okay, this is a trigger reaction, not personal animosity. Instead of snapping back, Greg could calmly say, I can see you're upset. Let's pause. My intent is to help, not to blame. Maybe we should talk about this later in private. This de escalation move could completely change the outcome. Later, in a one on one, Greg gently inquire if there's something affecting Sal's work or if he needs any support. Even if Sal doesn't disclose his trauma, he will at least see that Greg isn't out to get him. Over time, Sal may begin to trust Greg as a fair manager, and Greg will likely see better performance from Sal, with a bit of understanding and perhaps some workload adjustment if Sal was indeed overloaded. Trust and communication improve, and the whole team avoids the fearful tension. Think of being trauma informed as being proactive and empathetic. It's about asking, how can we help this person succeed? Rather than, what's wrong with this person? When behavior or performance falters, it's also about recognizing the hidden strengths trauma can build. Yes, you heard right, strengths. Many trauma survivors develop incredible resilience, problem solving skills, and empathy. They often have a high capacity for loyalty and perseverance because they've been through tough times. A workplace that supports them can harness those strengths. These are stories of employees who, once supported, became some of the most dedicated, creative members of the team, precisely because they valued the second chance or understanding they were given. Before we close, let's address a possible skeptic's thought. Isn't this just coddling employees? Work is work, and people should deal with their personal issues on their own time. It's true. That work can't be therapy. But being trauma informed isn't about lowering standards or excusing performance indefinitely. It's about removing unnecessary barriers to good performance and not inflicting additional harm. Employees still have to perform their jobs. It's our jobs as leaders to create an environment where they can perform at their best. If someone fails to meet standards, even with support, you can address that appropriately. But you'll find that when support is offered, many employees rise to the occasion, often with deep gratitude. Moreover, a trauma-informed approach can prevent problems from escalating to the point of termination or conflict in the first place. It's preventative maintenance for your workforce, if you will. Here's an expert perspective to wrap up. The CEO of a company that adopted trauma-informed practices said in an interview, "We found that when we took care of our employees during their toughest times, they repaid us with loyalty and hard work tenfold. This sentiment is echoed across organizations that have tried this approach. It builds trust, and trust, as we know, is the currency of a strong organizational culture." Finally, recall a quote from earlier. If even a small fraction of the resources spent on band-aid solutions was used to address root problems, we'd find more effective ways to improve worker health and performance. Addressing trauma is getting to the root. It's not some fringe benefit. It strikes at the heart of workplace well-being and productivity. As we conclude our two-part exploration, I want to leave you with this thought. People bring their whole selves to work, the good, the bad, and the scared. By recognizing and respecting that, leaders have a powerful opportunity to not only prevent harm, but to actually facilitate healing and growth. When employees feel seen and supported, they don't just perform better, they live better. And isn't that what great leadership is about? Healing people helping people be the best they can be in work and in life. So, whether you're an HR professional crafting policies, a manager leading a team, or an employee looking out for a colleague, remember that compassion and understanding are not just nice to haves. They are essential tools in your toolbox. Trauma may be hidden, but its impacts don't have to be. With the right knowledge and approach, we can create workplaces where those impacts are minimized and where every individual has a fair chance to succeed, no matter what they've been through. Thank you for listening to this deep dive on trauma in the workplace. I know we cover some heavy stuff, but I hope it sparked some insights and perhaps a desire to give that seemingly difficult colleague a bit of grace, or to tweak a policy to be just a bit more human-friendly. Change starts with awareness. As we often say in HR, everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind. In the workplace, being kind isn't just moral, it's practical. If you find this discussion useful, please share it with others and consider how you can champion a trauma-informed approach in your organization. Small steps lead to big changes. And as we learn, big tasks are built by a bunch of little tasks. So you can start small. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. This is the Resolution Room, and I'm your host. Signing off with a reminder, a little empathy goes a long way. Stay safe and be well.